Chapter 1. The invitation. The letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning in 1982, postmarked from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I remember staring at the envelope, the unfamiliar stamp with a moose silhouette catching my eye before I even opened it. My name, Thomas Reed, was scrawled in Jake's unmistakable sloppy handwriting. We hadn't spoken in years, not since college scattered us across the states. Jake had moved north after graduation, chasing some logging job in the Canadian prairies, while Sarah stayed in Seattle, teaching history at a community college. Me? I ended up in Chicago, crunching numbers for an insurance firm, far from the adventures we dreamed about as kids. Inside was a simple note. Tom, it's been too long. Sarah and I are planning a reunion. Come up to Lakewood. It's this old mining town in Saskatchewan, abandoned now, but full of history. We'll camp, hike, relive the old days. Bring your tent. August next year. Don't say no. It was signed with his usual flourish, and Sarah had added a postscript. Miss you, Tommy. It'll be like old times. We met in summer camp back in '72, up in the Adirondacks. 3 American kids thrown together in a cabin meant for 8. Jake was the loud one, always cracking jokes that landed flat but made him laugh anyway. Sarah was the bookworm, memorizing bird calls and star constellations by the second night. I was the quiet observer, tagging along until one rainy afternoon when we invented a game to pass the time, shadow tag, we called it. You'd chase shadows instead of people, twisting around trees and under benches. It sounded dumb, but it bonded us. After camp, we kept in touch through letters and phone calls, visiting each other's hometowns during holidays. High school flew by, then college. Jake at Michigan State, Sarah at Washington, me at Illinois. Life pulled us apart, but the memories lingered. Now, at 28, the idea of reuniting in some remote Canadian spot felt both thrilling and odd. Lakewood? I'd never heard of it, but a quick library search revealed it was a ghost town from the early 1900s, boomed with potash mining until the veins dried up in the 50s. Abandoned ever since, swallowed by the boreal forest. I wrote back, yes, of course. What else was there? Work was dull, my apartment empty. One last summer fling before we all hit 30. Chapter 2. The journey north. The drive from Chicago to Lakewood took 2 days in my beat-up Ford Pinto. I crossed the border at North Dakota, the customs officer eyeing my camping gear suspiciously before waving me through. Saskatchewan unfolded like an endless quilt of wheat fields and flat horizons, broken only by occasional grain elevators piercing the sky. By the time I hit the dirt roads leading to Lakewood, it was late afternoon on August 15th, 1983. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced across the gravel. Sarah's Jeep was already there, parked beside a rusted sign that read, Lakewood Mining Company, IST 1912. She stepped out, her hair longer than I remembered, tied back in a ponytail. Tommy, you made it, she called, pulling me into a hug. She smelled like sunscreen and pine. Jake's inside scouting spots. Said he'd find the perfect campsite. We'd barely caught up when Jake's truck rumbled up, kicking up dust. He hopped out, grinning ear to ear, his beard scruffier than in college. Tom, you old dog. Look at you, all city slicker. He clapped me on the back hard enough to rattle my teeth. We unloaded gear, tents, coolers, lanterns, and hiked into the town proper. Lakewood was a relic. Wooden shacks leaning like drunkards, a collapsed church steeple, mine shafts boarded up with weathered planks. The air carried a faint metallic tang, remnants of the potash dust that we set up camp near the old community hall, its walls still standing though the roof had caved in decades ago. As the sun dipped, we built a fire in a stone-ringed pit, roasting hot dogs and sharing stories. Jake talked about his logging crew, Sarah about her students. I mentioned my promotion, but it felt hollow. Remember Shadow Tag? Sarah said suddenly, poking the fire. That game we made up. Hours of fun in the rain. Jake laughed. Yeah, and Tom always lost because he tripped over his own feet. We chuckled, the fire crackling warmly. But as night fell, a chill crept in, and the shadows around us seemed to stretch unnaturally long. Chapter 3. Echoes of the Past. The next morning, we explored. Lakewood felt frozen in time. Rusted tools scattered in sheds, faded newspapers from 1954 yellowing in abandoned homes. Sarah, ever the historian, geeked out over artifacts. This place boomed during the war, she explained. Potash for fertilizers. Then the market crashed, and everyone left overnight. We found an old playground behind the schoolhouse, swings creaking in the breeze. Jake pushed Sarah on one, her laughter echoing. It reminded me of our camp days, carefree and unbreakable. That afternoon, we hiked to the mine entrance, a yawning black hole in the hillside. They say it's haunted, Jake joked, shining his flashlight inside. Miners who never came out. Sarah rolled her eyes. Ghost stories to scare kids. But I felt a prickle on my neck, like eyes watching from the dark. Back at camp, we played cards by lantern light. Talk turned to old games again. Shadow tag was the best, I said, chasing illusions instead of reality. Jake grinned. Let's play tonight. For old time's sake. Sarah hesitated, but we agreed. As dusk settled, we started in the clearing. Jake went first, chasing our shadows under the moonlight. It was silly, adult us giggling like kids. But when my shadow twisted oddly against a tree, I blinked, and it was gone. Just imagination, I told myself. Chapter 4. The first whisper. On the third day, rain came, a steady drizzle that turned the ground to mud. We huddled in the community hall's remnants, sharing a tarp. Stories flowed. Our first crushes, college pranks, the time Jake nearly got expelled for streaking. Sarah confessed she'd kept all our letters. You two are family, she said softly. The rain eased by evening, leaving the air fresh and heavy. We ventured out, flashlights cutting through fog. Jake suggested shadow tag again. One more round. This time, something felt off. As I chased Sarah's shadow, a whisper rustled through the trees, like a faint voice calling names. Did you hear that? I asked. They shook their heads. Wind, Jake said. But later, alone in my tent, the whisper returned, murmuring fragments of old mining songs. I dismissed it as exhaustion, but sleep came fitfully, dreams haunted by elongated shadows swallowing the town. Chapter 5. Unsettling discoveries. Midweek, we delved deeper. In an old miner's cabin, we found journals from the 1920s, entries about the shadow curse. One miner wrote, "The depths birthed something dark. It plays with light, mimics us. Those who chase it never return whole." Sarah read aloud, her voice steady but eyes wide. Folklore, she said. Every old town has it. Jake laughed it off, but I felt unease. That night, around the fire, the whispers grew louder, echoing our conversations. It's like the place is listening, I muttered. We played shadow tag to shake it off, but during the game, Jake's shadow detached briefly, slithering away before snapping back. He froze. What the hell? We stopped early, retreating to tents. In the dark, I heard Sarah whimper in her sleep. Morning brought no relief. Fog clung thick, and our footprints from the night before were overlaid with strange, elongated marks, as if shadows had walked without us. Chapter 6. The game turns. By day 6, tension simmered. Jake was irritable, snapping at small things. Sarah withdrew, burying herself in the journals. I tried mediating, but the whispers now came during daylight, calling our names in distorted voices. Tom, Sarah, Jake. Like echoes from the mine. Desperate for distraction, we hiked to the lake. Mirror Lake, the locals once called it, fed by underground springs. The water was unnaturally still, reflecting the overcast sky perfectly. Jake skipped stones, but each ripple distorted our reflections oddly, faces twisting. This place is getting to me, Sarah admitted. Back at camp, Jake proposed one last shadow tag. to conquer the creeps. Reluctantly, we agreed. As the sun set, shadows lengthened. I was at first chasing theirs. But when I tagged Jake's shadow, a chill shot through me, and he yelped, clutching his arm. Felt like ice, he said. Then the whispers intensified, forming words. Play or join us. We froze, staring into the darkening woods. Something moved, a silhouette, taller than any tree shadow, watching. Chapter 7. Descent into fear. Panic set in on day 7. We packed to leave, but Jake's truck wouldn't start, battery dead, though it was new. Sarah's Jeep had flat tires, slashed cleanly. Animals, I suggested weakly, but we knew better. The whispers laughed now, mocking our fear. Trapped, we barricaded in the hall. Sarah pored over journals. The curse started in 1923. Miners dug too deep, unearthed a shadow entity. It feeds on games, twists them. To escape, you must win its version or become part of it. Jake scoffed, but when night fell, the entity appeared, a writhing mass of darkness at the edge of camp, eyes like pinpricks of void. It whispered rules, shadow tag, but with it as the eternal it. Move only when its back is turned, signaled by silence. Cheat or flee, and it claims you that we had no choice. The game began. In the first round, we crept forward in the silence between whispers. Sarah stumbled, and when the whisper returned, her body jerked, shadow ripping from her like smoke. She screamed as it contorted her limbs, bones cracking. She fell, lifeless, shadow absorbed into the entity. Jake and I stared in horror. This isn't real, he gasped. But it was. The game continued. Chapter 8. Breaking point. Grief hit like an avalanche. Jake blamed himself. I dragged us here. I accused him of pushing the games. But the entity didn't care. Whispers resumed, forcing us to play. We advanced shakily, each silence a chance to close the gap.in. One pause. Jake lunged too far. The whisper cut in, and his shadow twisted violently, yanking his body backward. His spine arched, a sickening snap echoing. He crumpled, eyes vacant, shadow devoured. Alone, terror clawed at me. The entity loomed closer, its form a mockery of human, elongated limbs, chest hollow like a mine shaft. Whispers taunted, win or join them. I pressed on, ankle twisting on roots, pain fueling resolve. Memories flashed, our first camp, laughter, unbreakable bond. Now broken. Chapter 9. The final chase. Limping, I navigated the entity's game. Each silence shorter, the distance narrowing. Its breath was a rasp, shadows pulsing from slits in its form. I tripped once, freezing mid-fall as the whisper halted. Heart pounding, I imagined my end, shadow tearing me apart. Pushing up, pain searing, I inched forward. 10 feet, 5, 3. The entity stood still, waiting. With eyes shut, I reached out, touching cold void. The whisper stopped. Silence stretched. Opening my eyes, it was gone, replaced by a gnarled tree. But turning back, reality crushed me. Sarah and Jake's bodies lay twisted by the dying fire, shadows eternally still. Chapter 10. Survivor's lament. I collapsed, sobs racking me. The trucks started mysteriously. I drove out at dawn, leaving them behind. Authorities called it accidents, falls, wildlife. But I know the truth. The shadow curse of Lakewood claimed my friends, sparing me as the winner. Years later, in 1995, whispers return in my dreams. I cry for Jake and Sarah, for the games we played, for the innocence lost in that forsaken Canadian town. I survived, but part of me remains in the shadows. Conclusion. The sun rose over Lakewood, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold that felt cruelly indifferent to the night before. I sat slumped against the trunk of my car, the engine idling, keys trembling in my hand. The fire pit smoldered, a thin wisp of smoke curling upward like a final breath. Sarah's Jeep and Jake's truck sat where we'd left them, their tires still slashed, windshields fogged with morning dew. Beyond them, in the clearing, lay their bodies, Sarah's twisted frame, her braid fanned across the dirt, and Jake's crumpled form, face down as if he'd tried to run. I couldn't look at them anymore, but I couldn't stop seeing them either. Their shapes were burned into my eyes, shadows that refused to fade. My ankle throbbed, a pulsing reminder of the game, the fall, the thing I'd touched in the dark. I kept replaying that moment, my hand pressing against what I thought was the entity, only to find rough bark under my fingers. Had it been a trick? Had it ever been real? The tree stood innocently now, its branches swaying in the breeze, but I knew better. Lakewood wasn't just a place. It was alive, or something in it was, something that had played with us, twisted our game into a nightmare, and let me walk away. I drove out of Lakewood without looking back, the gravel crunching under my tires, each sound a hammer against my skull. The road stretched endlessly through Saskatchewan's flat expanse, fields blurring into a haze of green and gold. I didn't stop until I hit a gas station 50 miles out, where an old man in overalls filled my tank and asked if I was okay. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a stranger, eyes sunken, face pale, lips cracked. I looked like I'd aged a decade overnight. The police were kind, in that detached Canadian way. I found the nearest RCMP station in Saskatoon and told them everything, or at least the parts one could make sense of. 3 friends went camping. 2 didn't come back. I left out the whispers, the shadow entity, the game that killed them. How could I explain it? They'd think I was crazy, or worse, guilty. The officer took my statement, scribbling notes while I described Sarah's fall, Jake's collapse. Accidents, he concluded, his pen pausing. Happens in old places like that. Loose ground, wild animals. I didn't argue. What was the point? They sent a team to recover the bodies, and I was told to wait for further questions. I stayed in a motel on the edge of town, a dingy place with flickering lights and a mattress that smelled of mildew. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the whisper, that low, rasping melody weaving through the trees. I saw Sarah's spine snap, Jake's neck twist. I saw the entity's silhouette, its chest hollowed out like a mine shaft, exhaling shadows. I kept the TV on all night, the drone of a late-night talk show drowning out the silence. By morning, I was shaking, my hands unsteady as I packed my bag and drove south, back to Chicago. The city felt wrong when I returned. My apartment, with its neat rows of books and framed photos of college days, seemed like it belonged to someone else. I called in sick to work, then quit a week later. Numbers and spreadsheets felt meaningless after Lakewood. I couldn't sit in a cubicle, pretending the world made sense. My parents called, worried, but I dodged their questions. Just need time, I said, and they didn't push. Friends reached out, but I let their voicemails pile up. How could I explain what I'd seen? That I'd played a game and lost my best friends to something I didn't understand. Weeks turned into months. I moved to a smaller apartment, one I could afford without a steady job. I took freelance gigs, data entry, editing manuals, anything to keep the lights on. But the nights were the worst. The whispers followed me, faint at first, like a radio tuned to static. They came in dreams, calling my name in Sarah's voice, then Jake's, then something else entirely, a voice that wasn't human, rasping like whined through broken glass. I'd wake up gasping, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I stopped sleeping with the lights off, kept a lamp burning by my bed like a child afraid of the dark. By spring 1984, I started researching Lakewood. I drove to libraries, scoured archives, dug through microfiche records. The town's history was sparse but chilling. Founded in 1912, it thrived on potash mining until the 1950s, when the veins ran dry. Most residents left overnight, abandoning homes, tools, lives. But the journals we'd found in the miners' cabin stuck with me, those warnings about a shadow curse. I found more accounts, buried in obscure historical society records. A 1923 report mentioned miners vanishing after playing games near the mine entrance. A 1937 newspaper clipping described a child found dead in the woods, body contorted, with no visible cause. Locals whispered about a presence in the mines, something that played with light and demanded obedience. I tracked down a retired miner in Regina, a man named Harold Voss, who'd worked in Lakewood in the 1940s. He was in his late 70s, frail but sharp, living in a cluttered apartment filled with old photographs. When I mentioned the shadow curse, his face tightened. "You shouldn't go poking at that," he said, his voice low. "The mines went too deep. Stirred something up. It don't like being ignored, and it loves games. Always has." He wouldn't say more, just handed me a faded photo of the mine entrance, a dark maw in the earth. I left with more questions than answers, but his words echoed. It loves games. I tried moving on. In 1986, I took a job teaching math at a community college in Milwaukee, hoping a change of scenery would help. It didn't. Students noticed my distraction, my habit of staring out windows at shadows moving in the distance. I'd catch myself listening for whispers, freezing when a breeze rattled the blinds. One night, grading papers, I saw my shadow flicker on the wall, stretching longer than it should. I dropped my pen, heart racing, but when I turned, it was just the desk lamp flickering. I quit the next semester. By 1988, I was back in Chicago, living off savings and odd jobs. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Ellis who specialized in trauma. I told her about Lakewood, leaving out the supernatural parts. She diagnosed PTSD, prescribed pills that dulled the edges but didn't stop the dreams. "You're carrying survivor's guilt," she said. "You feel responsible for their deaths." She wasn't wrong, but she didn't know the half of it. I couldn't tell her about the entity, the way it had forced us to play, the way it had let me win. Was it mercy? Or something worse? The dreams grew worse over time. By 1990, they weren't just memories. They were vivid, immersive. I'd be back in Lakewood, standing in the clearing, Sarah and Jake alive again, laughing as we played shadow tag. But the game always turned, their shadows twisting, their bodies breaking. The entity would appear, its hollow chest glowing with faint light, whispering my name. I'd wake up screaming, my neighbors pounding on the walls. I stopped taking the pills. They made the dreams too real. In 1992, I found a letter in my mailbox, no return address. It was a single page, typed and signed. "You won, but it's not over. It never forgets." My hands shook as I read it. Was it a prank? A threat? I burned it in the sink, watching the paper curl into ash, but the words lingered. I started avoiding mirrors, afraid I'd see my shadow move on its own. I stopped going out at night, kept my curtains drawn. The world felt like it was closing in, shadows creeping at the edges. By 1995, I was a ghost of myself. I'd lost weight, my hair thinning, my eyes perpetually red from lack of sleep. Friends stopped calling. I'd pushed them away too long. My parents visited once, their faces creased with worry, but I couldn't explain. How do you tell someone you survived a game that killed your best friends, played by rules you didn't understand, enforced by something that wasn't human? I spent my days in libraries, digging deeper into Lakewood's history, chasing answers. I found a 1918 miner's log mentioning a ritual, a way to appease the shadow entity by offering it a game. "Play and win, or it takes you," the log read. "It always wins in the end." I started writing everything down, a journal of my own to make sense of it. Pages filled with memories of Sarah and Jake, details of the game, descriptions of the entity. I sketched its form: long limbs, hollow chest, eyes like voids. Writing helped, grounding me, but it also kept Lakewood alive. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let them go. One night in late 1995, I drove to a park outside Chicago, needing air, needing to escape the walls of my apartment. The moon was full, casting sharp shadows across the grass. I walked aimlessly, hands in pockets, until I heard it. A faint whisper, the same melody from Lakewood. My blood ran cold. I turned, expecting to see the entity, but there was nothing, just trees and moonlight. My shadow stretched long behind me, quivering as if alive. I ran back to my car, locked the doors, and drove home, heart pounding. The whispers didn't stop. They followed me into 1996, growing louder, more insistent.